and those who have registered can continue to join as we move along. My name is Jessica Gorham, and I'm the Regional Emergency GBV Advisor working on behalf of the GBV Area of Responsibility, which is the global coordination mechanism for gender-based violence in emergencies. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague at country level, who is Akiko, who is the subsector coordinator in Sudan. And Akiko, maybe if you want to just say a few words before we begin.
Thank you so much, Jessica. First of all, for organizing this session. This is very important for all of us in Sudan, and taking your time. And welcome everyone. So my name is Akiko. I'm a GBV subsector coordinator. You might have seen my name when you received the invitation from your respective sector coordinators. So I coordinate GBV at national level. We have 12 GBV working groups at subnational level. Maybe your colleagues are working field level. So the reason why we organize this session is that we are hearing from the field that there is an urgent need for risk mitigation. Humanitarian workers who are not necessarily working for GBV happen to identify GBV survivors. They are requesting for our guidance to how to deal with the GBV survivors, and and this is exactly what is this session will be covering. When a GBV actor is not available in your area, how to support survivors. So this is exactly the purpose of this session. And then in the future, in the near future, you will have a session for your respective sectors that in your respective sector, WASH, House, FSL, or any sectors, that how to actually mitigate GBV risks in your everyday interventions, in your sector. So this will be the future session. So please register for these sessions as well. But today we would really like to focus on how, as a humanitarian actor, you can support the survivor. I'm sure you were, witnessing a lot of GBV risks, when you, conduct your activities, interventions, etc. So let us learn from this session. Thank you so much for joining again.
Thanks, Akiko. I'm going to put my video on just for a second so you can see me, but we are going to keep our videos off throughout this session because I know that many people are joining us from different areas around Sudan that might have different internet loads. So if you could do us a kindness and please turn off your video throughout our 2 hours together, we would appreciate it. And you have the capacity to unmute yourself. In the corner of your screen, you'll see a microphone. And if you click that on or off, you'll see that you're able to mute and unmute yourself. So since we are a smaller group, you will have the capacity to unmute yourself. But of course, one of our group norms is if you could please keep yourself on mute and cameras off, that would be appreciated because everybody is coming in with different Wi-Fi levels. So some of you might be in an area that you're saying, oh, my Wi-Fi looks great. But others might have difficulties. So we need to help them share the load if we could. So those are the two main rules for the webinar today. And since I'm going to follow our second rule and put off my video, but I wanted you to see who I am. And then also, make sure that if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. You can either ask them in the chat, which is certainly fine. I will be monitoring the chat throughout our time together, so you are welcome to do that. Or you can raise your hand through the mechanism down. So if you go to more on the bottom of your screen, you'll see, I think it's apps. No, I think it's in more. Anyway, there should be you'll find it on yours. There should be a way for you to do emoticons too, if you want to, either raise your hand or as I said, you could unmute, but I think it would be easier if you raise your hand and then I can call on you. Or, as I said, you could also write your question in the chat and I'll make sure to monitor it throughout. Any questions about how we will proceed? I don't see any microphones unmuted and I don't see any hands. So that's a good sign. If I am speaking too fast, please let me know. I'm consciously speaking slower because I know we have a lot of people who English is their second language. And so I want to make sure that I'm speaking slowly and clearly so that everybody is able to understand the materials. And I'm also going to try and make it interactive, but really the success of that is dependent on you. So please do feel free to ask any questions. I guarantee I have heard every question that you would probably want to pose. And none of this embarrasses me. So if you think, oh, I'm not sure about this, I guarantee someone else will have the same question and I've probably answered it before. So please do feel free, or you can private message me. I also want to thank my colleague Shiva, who is providing some technical support today. So she is my colleague Shiva, who's based in our Geneva office, and she has very gratefully agreed to share her screen. Hi, Shiva. From Geneva so that I can also help, because our Wi-Fi connection sometimes at the UN here in Nairobi isn't as great as it could be. So thanks, Shiva, for your support. We do appreciate it. Okay, since I see there are no questions, I think we'll get started. So Shiva, next slide, please. First, I wanted to talk about what kind of GBV risks have you identified through your work? Can anybody help? Have you, in your work, delivering services or aid in Sudan, have you identified any specific risks? And we'll get to these pictures in a minute. Any? You can either go off mic or else I can also pick as well. I'm okay with doing that. Or you can write in the chat. Let's think. I have some ideas of risks that have been identified that directly relate to other sectors, but I'm wondering if you might have an awareness of some of the GBV risks that you might encounter in your own sector.
Hello, Jessica.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's Hannah from
Hannah.
Dubai.
Yes, hi Hannah, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to read like the type of the risk that we face in the operation, like access to the basic needs. For example, the water and sometimes even the food, especially during the crisis time, during the conflict, this issue. So the basic needs, if it's food, water, or health, and also the livelihood opportunity. Thank you.
Yep, great. And Hannah, what sector do you work for?
Protection, community-based protection.
Aha, okay, so you're seeing this firsthand. And I'm glad you're on the line, Hannah, because many people think that this issue is not related to them. And Hannah, you made a lot of good linkages. Zainab, you said a lack of services often leads to increased vulnerabilities. And this is also true. Any others? I heard Hannah picked out food insecurity being a very direct link to gender-based violence. And this is true. We are seeing in Sudan linkages between gender-based violence and food insecurity. We also saw, Zainab said, lack of services. Any others? Mawada, you said safe accessibility to services. this is true, to services and also resources. I'm going to go one more and say it's not also about just the service, but it's also the resource. Let's take a picture of that woman on the left. She is at a food distribution center. What do we see as some of the potential risks for her? Anybody? Iman, access to energy. I like this one too. We're going to come to that one on the next picture. Does anybody see any risks? Makri?
Hi,
Yep, go ahead.
good afternoon.
Hi,
Good
Makri.
afternoon. Yeah.
Hi. Can you tell
So,
us what sector you are from and your name?
okay, I'm Makarim Noor. I'm working in protection sector.
Okay.
So that according to the questions, as you know that right now in Sudan, we're passing with painful war, with painful situation, and all the people suffering there. So the women, they are passing with different types of GBV, or could I say all the types of GBV, regard to the economic violence, physical violence, rape, harassment, even there is lack of income, even they battling with domestic violence, or you can say they are right now they are facing difficult situation. So even they facing big risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahrim. And how about, which you also mentioned, Mawada, can you tell us some of the risks that you see in that left picture? Go ahead.
Okay. When we talk about accessibility to all the goods that we are distributing or all the services that we are providing, we have to make sure that for a longer term, these measurements that we are taken into consideration do not expose the beneficiaries and the right holder to further harm. So from my point of view, when we are distributing any kind of goods, if the packaging is not make it easier for the beneficiary to take them from one location to another, if it's too heavy or it's difficult for certain individuals to carry it on their own, they might be exposed for robbery, or in sometimes they could be attacked, and in some worse scenarios could be killed or severely injured. So when we are making any certain packages for goods or NFIs, we have to make sure that these individuals who we are targeting and trying to support can carry out these items to their own location safely. If not, if we can try to do some certain measurements to deliver it to a safer or nearby location, or home to door-to-door distribution. This is my point of view, that this an elder woman, she's not very old, but she lives on her own, and this is also a burden of vulnerability. She cannot ask for assistance for different people to support her to carry out her goods to her home safely. She might be exposed to danger or robbery, and I think if we take extra step in packaging the goods, we can reduce the exposure to harm.
Exactly. Mawada, perfect answer. That's exactly correct. If you look at this woman, she's clearly not able to lift her ration. And right there, that increases her vulnerability. And we know this for a fact. We have evidence from the Darfur states and other countries in the region that this is a reality for women and girls. Moada, you correctly identified her as most likely a female-headed household. They are the ones able to get the rations. They have the ticket. So what this woman ends up doing is negotiating away her resources. As soon as she leaves this distribution site, she then has to negotiate for her safety and for transport. By the time she gets to her home, most likely, and we know this because we've done studies, most likely she ends up having only 50% of her rations left. She's had to pay for transport. She's had to pay or give gatekeepers in her communities a ration. Sometimes even the food distribution officers themselves demand a piece. So this is a type of GBV. It's a denial of resources, it's an economic violence, and it can very easily shift into sexual violence. We know that women negotiate constantly throughout their day in order for them to feed their families. I'm also really concerned about all those young men seemingly outside of the gate, right? Hands up. Mohammed, exactly. A heavy load might cause the harm in the long term. I see a lot of looting by others, but also it's the negotiation away of her rights, really. And it's unfortunate that no one has thought ahead about how we can very simply mitigate some of these vulnerabilities. Someone in the chat mentioned, and this is another big one, had also mentioned access to energy. Let's look at this second picture. What do we see here? Anybody? What does that second picture show us? Yeah, Iman, it shows us firewood collection. If I could solve the issue of firewood, I feel like I would be at the very highest level of the UN. I've been talking about firewood for 20 years. Can you imagine? When I first started my career 20 years ago, I was talking about women and girls who are raped while they are out collecting firewood. And Zainab, this has not changed. 20 years later, we're about to put a person on Mars, but we still can't figure out the issue of firewood. Can you imagine? We can't figure out a way for women and adolescent girls, particularly, to be safe, either while collecting firewood or an alternate energy source so that they don't have to collect firewood. And this is happening in Sudan. So who's responsible? And that's why we're all here today, is to talk about our responsibilities as humanitarian workers. Next slide, please. So there are two areas that you, from other clusters, can intercede or engage in. One is using these guidelines. Has anybody ever seen these guidelines? I hope so. If you have, if you want to do a thumbs up or drop me a note in the chat. These are the guidelines for integrating gender-based violence interventions in humanitarian action. And as you notice in that picture of the guidelines, they have tags, or what we call tags, on the right. So for every sector, whether it's camp, coordination, health, protection, child protection, nutrition, water, sanitation and hygiene, agriculture, food security, these guidelines provide advice and then also some very practical tools for you to use to mitigate risks in your programs and all across your interventions. Pretty good, right? If you go online and find the GBV guidelines, you will come to your sector. You can pick out health, and there is a very concise set of guidance for you to be able to mitigate risks throughout your project cycle. And it wasn't just GBV specialists who made these guidelines. Really, the guidelines were developed by your sector specialists in coordination with GBV specialists. So we tried to make them as practical as possible. There's a checklist, and it's a pretty easy one to go through some very key actions that you could take to mitigate GBV risks. Very simple interventions that could have an amazing impact on the safety of women and girls. I think we can all agree, all of us who are on this call today, that none of us want to be responsible for women and girls being raped while they access one of our services. And it brings us to that do no harm policy. So this is one of our resources, and you can find this online, and I'm sure one of my colleagues can even put the link to it in the chat. So these are the guidelines for integration. Next slide, please, Shiva. So for the responsibilities for non-GBV actors, that's basically everybody on this call today, we would consider non-GBV specialists or actors. There are two key asks, and I shouldn't even say asks, because it's not us. At the very highest level, at the IASC level, which is the executive directors of all of our agencies, whether you're in the UN or an NGO, or you're funded by one of those NGOs or UN. So at the very highest level, the IASC has approved what I'm about to share with you today, that it's not an ask, it's a responsibility. So the first one, and this we're not going to discuss today, but as Akiko mentioned, we will discuss in sector-specific trainings that we are organizing later on in the month. So I'll actually take you through some of this guidance, and then we'll give some practical ways that you can mitigate risks starting tomorrow. So one of the key responsibilities is implementing programs that minimize GBV risks. Full stop. And then the second one, which is what we're going to discuss today, and this one is a universal responsibility. Regardless of your sector, these set of guidelines would be the same for a food security officer as it would be for a WASH volunteer, or a nutritionist, or a health worker. So you might minimize risks in your programs differently, depending on your sector. But this second responsibility is the same for all of us. Can someone read that second bullet point for me? Who can read it? I'm going to call out a name. How about Rahab? Rahab, can you read the second bullet point? Rahab Haider. I'm also good at just picking people, picking volunteers. Rahab, can you read that second bullet point for us?
Hello?
Go ahead.
Yes. The key responsibilities for non-GBV actors
Yep.
implement programming in a way that minimize GBV risks. Be prepared to respond if a survivor comes to you for help. Have relevant information and understand how to provide safe and opportunity relevance to services.
Perfect.
I'm sorry,
Very
just
good.
yeah,
Nope, that was
yeah.
perfect,
Sorry,
Rahab.
just
Yep. I know I'm keeping everyone
um,
on your feet as well, because I might call on you to
yeah,
either read or provide feedback. That was perfect. So exactly,
yeah.
Rahab,
Thank
we're going to focus on that second one. Be prepared to respond if a survivor comes to you for help. And we are going to give you the basic tools or knowledge on how to do that. Because there are limitations to your engagement, where a GBV specialist would then take over. Okay, if you have questions, please do write them in the chat, because Akiko is monitoring as well as Shiva if I'm not able to get to it. So please do write if you have any questions. Okay, next slide, please. So our second responsibility, which is basically about how we engage a survivor or other vulnerable individuals while we're doing our work. And we here at the GBV AOR have developed a step-by-step guide for humanitarian practitioners that helps us do just that. Okay, who can read out some of these key points on the pocket guide? You can go off mic if you'd like to read some of these.
I can read it to you.
Yep, go ahead, Zainab.
Okay, pocket guide, step-by-step guide for non-GBV specialists. Based on the psychological first aid framework, look between two breaks, look, listen, and think. Key messages that you can use of the survivor. Specialists special consideration for child survivor. Special consideration for child survivor.
Perfect. Thank you, Zainab. That was beautiful. So it's a step-by-step guide for non-GBV specialists. That's all of you. This guideline very clearly identifies the limitations of your engagement. We do not expect you to be a GBV social worker, a GBV caseworker, or a GBV specialist. We expect you to show kindness and empathy when you encounter someone who is in crisis, and then refer them to someone who has the skill set to be able to follow up. And that's really the principle of the psychological first aid framework, PFA. Does anybody have any experience or has had any training on PFA? You can raise your hand or put in the chat. Okay. Mawada, you do? Good. And all of you should. Hannah, good. Because PFA isn't specific to gender-based violence. Makaram, good. PFA is not specific to gender-based violence, but we think it's a good framework through which you can speak to someone, as I said, using kindness and empathy. It's basically just being a good person, right? And so I think whether you're dealing with a survivor of gender-based violence, someone at risk of violence, or even an individual who's just gone through another type of trauma, these basic concepts of PFA are good universally. This little book, and again, we'll put a link to this book, the Step-by-Step Pocket Guide. This book contains key messages that you can use with a survivor. And this is where it's also good to practice so that you don't feel nervous or you don't inadvertently say the wrong thing. And then, of course, we always have special considerations for child survivors. And those are also in coordination or partnership with the child protection sector. Those were included in this pocket guide. Any questions? Okay, great. Next slide, please. So key messages. Who can help us read some of these key messages? I'm going to go down a little further. Oh, I have someone off. Go ahead. Hagir?
Key messages. Always take to GBV specialist first to understand what GBV services are available in your area. Be aware of any other services available in your area. Remember your rule. Don't proactively identify or see or call survivors. Remember your mandate.
Really good. Thank you. Thank you, Hagir. So yes, really good, important reminders. First, you should always talk to a GBV specialist first to understand what services are available in your area. And we're going to go over that more in depth later on. I'm going to skip to this third one. Remember your role. You are not a GBV social worker. Don't take my job. That's us. That's Akiko. That's me. That's members of the GBV subsector. That's our job. We don't want you to proactively identify or seek out survivors. This training is specifically designed for if an individual approaches you during the course of your work and they identify themselves as a person at risk of GBV or a survivor of GBV, we want you to have the tools to be able to respond in a safe and ethical and empathetic way. That's it. That is all this is. We do not want you to follow up on that case. We don't want you to take case notes. We don't want you to initiate a safety plan for that survivor. What we want is for your initial engagement to be a safe, ethical, and empathetic one so that that survivor feels at that moment that they have the information they need to then potentially get referred to another service. So that's about remember your role. We don't expect you to do the work of the GBV subsector, but we do expect you to treat everyone with kindness. Okay, the shelter cluster put together a great video. A movie implies that we're going to be here for a lot longer than 2 hours. They put together a great video that captures all of these key messages. So next slide, let's take a look at this video and then we can discuss a little.
Gender-based violence is among the most widespread forms of violence. Women and girls are especially vulnerable to GBV, but it can also affect boys, men, adolescents, elderly people, and those with disabilities. This film is for humanitarian workers who may meet people disclosing GBV incidents during humanitarian crisis. GBV incidents are often hidden, and supporting survivors is always complex and sensitive. If a survivor approaches you and discloses an incident, Ensure that any urgent needs receive immediate attention and that you're both safe. Listen carefully and treat any information given as confidential. Do not ask details. Do not record any information about the incident or the survivor. Inform the survivor of the options available to them. Only share accurate and up-to-date information about services available in the area and explain how to access them. If you are asked to help contact any type of service, the survivor must understand and agree to who will be informed and what will happen next. This is informed consent. If they give their consent, follow the referral pathway defined by GBV specialists in your area. Respect the survivor's choice. Do not counsel them or try and force assistance. Do inform them that help can also be sought at a later stage. Regardless of if a survivor chooses to access services or not, do not share details of the incidents or personal identifiers unless the survivor asks you to do so. Remember the key principles of safety, consent, confidentiality, and respect. You can only offer support if the incident is disclosed directly to you by the survivor. Under no circumstances should you look for GBV survivors. This can endanger them and yourself. If someone other than the survivor approaches you, give them information about available assistance that they can share with the survivor. Explain that safety and confidentiality must be preserved. Training and guidance from GBV specialists are essential to understand how you can assist survivors safely. Ask your manager what's available. You and your team should also be familiar with your agency's code of conduct and know that any sexual exploitation or abuse by humanitarians is strictly prohibited. If unsure of what to do at any point, seek advice from a GBV specialist whilst upholding confidentiality.
Pretty good, isn't it? I think that video is great, actually, because it encapsulates all of the main points that we will be going over in the next hour. What are some of the key themes that came out of that video? We can actually take time to listen to it again, too, in a couple minutes. But what are some key things that you took from that video? You can either write in the chat, raise your hand, or go off mic. What are some key things or some key takeaways from the video that you just watched? Go ahead, Hawida, go ahead. Hawida Ahmed, go ahead.
Yes. Hello, everyone. One of the key things that I understand from this short, useful video is first, we should not, as non-GBV specialists, should not be actively looking for the survivor. We should only react when they approach us. This is a major important point. Secondly, we should only give support and advices to ensure safety and of the survivor, also to the respect and to be responsible while we're dealing with them, so that we need to get their consent on what we have to do, and we need to be also confidential. We should not spread information. Also, one of the messages that we should consider ourselves as only helper. We should not intervene in the job of the GBV specialist, and we should stick to our role of being a helper and director to the safety uh, and healthiness of the survivor, not more than that. Thank you very much.
Ooh, Hawida, amazing. I'm so happy you raised your hand because you hit a lot of really good points. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And I see some others here in the chat, not to share the survivor information with others. Zainab, excellent. And then Babakar, you are saying, but don't even record it. Do not record or document so that you wouldn't even be tempted to share any information because you're not even documenting it. I saw that. Sarah, excellent. Do not seek out a GBV survivor. Even ourselves as GBV specialists, unless we're talking about a child survivor where they have a different responsibility for care, we would never actively look for or seek out a survivor because, just as you said, it's to protect them and ourselves and also maintain their confidentiality. Yep. Have information on support ready, and we're going to go over what that means. Hannah, you had your hand raised, and then we'll go to Mohammed. Hannah, do you have other ones?
Yeah, I just want to add next to what our colleague mentioned, that you have to be like good listener and do not force the survivor to seek the support, but first explain the available service and give like the contact, the referral list where she or he can find the service, and ensure that the key principle of its safety, confidentiality, respect, and consent. And the other point have been mentioned. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Hannah, I'm going to add one more: confidentiality, safety, and respect. And Khalda, I see that you also mentioned those, but also non-discrimination. We also consider that one of our guiding principles. Mohammed, go ahead. Mohammed, you have your hand raised. Over to you. Okay, while Mohammed is getting his sound, let's go to Mawada. Go ahead.
Thank you, colleague, for highlighting the important messages, but I just want to ensure that we all remember that the service is available at any time. Sometimes when we explain the available services and the consent and what might happen in different scenarios to the survivor, they could reject the service and the support at the moment. But when we assure them that this services and this support is going to be available at all time in any different stage, we are not going to deny you from the services. We are not going to deny you from the help. If you choose not to proceed now, it's okay to ask for help in different stages, in different time. They might be under psychological trauma or under shock, or they still navigate the options around themselves, but at certain points they will come and ask you, we did say we don't need help, but now we need it. Are we eligible for that help? Are we included in that help? I'm just want to highlight that help is always available, even though we are not GBV specialists, but we have to keep our door open to any kind of survivor or anyone whom seeking help. Thank you.
Good. And Moada, that's a really good reinforcement, but I'm also going to say, and I don't think this is what you were saying, but this is a good segue for me to remind everyone there are limitations to your engagement. As we saw on the video, actually, let's watch that video again now that we're all taking in. Let's watch that video again and let's see what Moada, exactly your point. What happens when the survivor doesn't want to be referred? Let's see what it says in the video. And this reinforces exactly what you said. And Syed, it respects the survivor's choice. So let's take another minute to re-watch again.
Gender-based violence is among the most widespread forms of violence. Women and girls are especially vulnerable to GBV, but it can also affect boys, men, adolescents, elderly people and those with disabilities. This film is for humanitarian workers who may meet people disclosing GBV incidents during humanitarian crisis. GBV incidents are often hidden, and supporting survivors is always complex and sensitive. If a survivor approaches you and discloses an incident, ensure that any urgent needs receive immediate attention and that you're both safe. Listen carefully and treat any information given as confidential. Do not ask details. Do not record any information about the incident or the survivor. Inform the survivor of the options available to them. Only share accurate and up-to-date information about services available in the area and explain how to access them. If you are asked to help contact any type of service, the survivor must understand and agree to who will be informed and what will happen next. This is informed consent. If they give their consent, follow the referral pathway defined by GBV specialists in your area. Respect the survivor's choice. Do not counsel them or try and force assistance. Do inform them that help can also be sought at a later stage. Regardless of if a survivor chooses to access services or not, do not share details of the incidents or personal identifiers unless the survivor asks you to do so. Remember the key principles of safety, consent, confidentiality, and respect. You can only offer support if the incident is disclosed directly to you by the survivor. Under no circumstances should you look for GBV survivors. This can endanger them and yourself. If someone other than the survivor approaches you, give them information about available assistance that they can share with the survivor. Explain that safety and confidentiality must be preserved. Training and guidance from GBV specialists are essential to understand how you can assist survivors safely. Ask your manager what's available. You and your team should also be familiar with your agency's code of conduct and know that any sexual exploitation or abuse by humanitarians is strictly prohibited. If unsure of what to do at any point, seek advice from a GBV specialist whilst upholding confidentiality.
Okay, so good. I think I saw some other points in the chat which are good. And Milena, you had a good one. You had a good question. When are field workers supposed to refer the survivor to the GBV focal point? Great question. So we have two scenarios. One is that there are no GBV service providers in the communities in which you work. And that's a reality, as we know. We are a small sector. We don't get the same amount of funding, for instance, that some of our larger sectors get. And that directly impacts the number of human resources we have on the ground. So we have two scenarios. The first one is you are working in a community where there are no GBV services or GBV specialists. The second scenario is that those do exist. There's a referral pathway in place. As soon as you engage with a survivor or someone at risk, and they tell you that they want help and they would like to be linked to someone who has the ability to help them, your engagement with a survivor or someone at risk could be as short as 2 to 3 minutes. If that person approaches you, you can say, and we will have some more in depth as the time goes on, but you can say very plainly, this sounds really complex, and I'm sorry to hear this is happening. I am not able to provide the support you need, but I know that this person might be able to listen and help you. And then you saw in the video that they gave them a copy of the referral pathway. And then at other times we saw that they accompanied them to a safe space and then linked them to that service. Does that make sense to everybody? So really your engagement or interaction with an individual will be quite minimal because it's all about looking, listening, and then linking. That's it. We don't want you to take notes on them. We really want you to be just a good person and say, okay, this sounds like it's a really complicated situation. It's not one I am able to help you with, but I don't want to minimize what you're saying. And therefore, this is somebody who could help. We're going to talk about later on what we do in circumstances where there are no helpers or other service providers. So Milena, I'm going to come back to the second part. Very briefly, you should be referring to a GBV focal point if they exist and if they agree. That's why consent is so important, very quickly in your interaction with them. Okay, if you have other questions, make sure that you write them. Aha, Akiko, really good. So Akiko said there are focal points at state level. And what we also know that focal points exist in one place, but you might be working in a very place that doesn't look, isn't even close to where the focal point lives. And so we want to give you the tools to be able to follow up on that as well. Okay, next slide, please. So very quickly, some key terms. In order to understand gender-based violence, we have to talk about power. The ability to control and access resources, opportunities, and decision-making processes. Power can both be real and perceived. For example, the food distribution officer, they're not carrying a gun. Do they have power over individuals in the community? Yes. They have, yeah, exactly, Hannah. They have potentially the same amount of power as a soldier would have, who carries a gun. The food security officer has the power to decide whether your family eats. We also know that gender is an important determinant of power. In order for gender-based violence to take place, there has to be a power differential or an unequal power relationship. It could be a physical one. Literally, someone's bigger and forcing themselves on someone. It could, as we said, be perceived that a person is in a position of power. Maybe they're not holding a gun. Maybe they're not a big person, but they have control or power over whether a family eats, whether they have access to clean water, whether they have access to education. Power is at the foundation, or I should say, unequal power relationships are the foundation of gender-based violence in both humanitarian settings and also in development settings. Very quickly, what do you think is the most prevalent type of violence against women and girls, whether in development or in humanitarian settings? Any ideas? What do you think is the most prevalent type of violence? Even to this day. Who can help? You can either unmute yourselves or write it in the, yeah. Oh, Iman. Yep. Iman says sexual violence. What do others think? Anybody? In fact, it's intimate partner violence. Yeah, someone wrote IPV. Zainab. Across the region, across the world, it's, yep, is intimate partner violence. That's violence that has been perpetrated by someone who is known intimately to the survivor or person at risk. That doesn't minimize the impact of sexual violence, but I'm telling you all today that it's important that we don't forget that fact. Whether you're in South Sudan or Somalia, the highest rates or the most prevalent type of violence is intimate partner violence. And we don't always, right? It doesn't get oftentimes the attention that sexual violence gets. But that doesn't mean that survivors or people at risk of intimate partner violence don't deserve the same kindness and empathy as you would afford any other type of violence. It's rampant. Okay. The next, I think, key term, and they use the word consent in the video, but I want us to look at this more in-depth definition, and we say informed consent. Can someone read out informed consent? I can pick someone. How about Alessandra Rossi? Can you help us read out those points under informed consent?
Sure. Making an informed choice freely and voluntarily by persons in an equal power relationship. Acts of GBV occur when there is no informed consent. Children under age 18 are unable to give informed consent for acts such as female genital cutting, FGC, marriage, sexual relations, etc.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yep, that's exactly right. And we also use that term informed consent when we talk about referrals as well. That it's our responsibility to inform the person at risk or the survivor of all of their potential choices or lack of services before they make a decision about how they want to move forward. Okay, next slide, please. Shiva? Unless I'm not seeing it. Yeah, thank you. And that brings us to one of the other terms I wanted to very much talk about just briefly. I'm not going to get into a huge background on gender-based violence and the terminology because it doesn't even matter for this exercise. This exercise is really about you linking a person to a potential service provider. So the survivor-centered approach is really the framework and foundation of everything we do. Respect. Actually, can we have somebody else help us? How about Amira Bahit? Can you help us read some of these principles, Amira? Or Zainab, I see you have yours raised. Okay, go ahead.
Survivor-centered approach. Respect. All actions you take are guided by respect for the survivor choices, which is rights and dignity. Safety. The safety of the survivor is a number one priority. Confidentiality. People have the right to choose to whom they will or will not tell their story, Maintaining confidentiality means not sharing any information to anyone. Non-discrimination, providing an equal and fair treatment to anyone in need of support.
Great. Thank you, Zainab. That was perfect. So respect plus safety plus confidentiality plus non-discrimination equals the survivor-centered approach. And this is what we would like you to incorporate in all of your engagements or interactions. And our principles, this is really the principles on which all GBV specialists do their work, are founded on these 4 principles: respect, safety, confidentiality, non-discrimination. And I think, yes, some of the ways that we describe these 4 concepts can be specific to GBV, but really they should be, I think, right? They're universal. I hope whether you're working in nutrition, that you're showing respect, safety, confidentiality, non-discrimination. If you're working in agriculture, you're using all of these. For us, it's really the backbone of what we do, because it also speaks to safety and security as well. But really, ideally, these shouldn't be new concepts for anyone. I can't stress enough that what we want from you is to be good communicators and helpers. And that basically means just link to a service provider or another service. Okay, next slide, please. Which brings us to the pocket guide. So I'm going to go off of I'm going to put my camera on, and I'm going to ask all of us to get our phones. So you can see your phone here. I'm putting mine up to the screen. Everybody, let's bring our phone out. We realized that a lot of this information can be overwhelming when you have experienced a survivor or someone at risk is standing in front of you. So we're not usually very tech savvy here at the GBV AOR, but we have created this app. So I want you to go to the Google Play Store or the Apple. Go to Google Play Store and look up GBV Pocket Guide. And it will look like the purple icon on your screen. So it's a free app. I'm going to give us all a few minutes right now to go into the Google Play Store, which is this, as you can see. And then if you're in the Google Play Store, in the search engine, you will write GBV Pocket Guide. And I'm doing that right now. Let me see if you're able to see that. Yeah, there you go. Do you see in the search? I put GBV Pocket Guide, and then this emblem comes up. I would like us all to download the app, to install it. It's a free app. Once you download this app, it does not require Wi-Fi for you to use it any other time after. It should only take you maybe about a minute. And then it will look like this on your phone once you've downloaded it. The icon. It's next to my Uber app. Okay. It says GBV Pocket Guide, and it looks just like that purple icon on the slide. Let me know in the chat if you found it and you're downloading it. That would be great. I'll give everybody a minute. So Google Play Store, you're going to put in the search engine, GBV Pocket Guide, just like that. We are getting this translated into other languages, but right now we have it in English, and it'll look like this. Found it and downloading. Great, Hawida. That's awesome. And it'll look like this icon, and then it's a free download. Thanks, Zainab. Sarah, awesome. Makram, great. Oh, Hannah already has it. I like it. Good. Kalda, good. Okay. It's downloading for some of you. I want us just to like take a look. I'm gonna open it. Okay, Amal, I see you. Just a minute to download. No problem. So we have a help you experience. You can go take me straight to the app. We did add. And then you'll see on the main menu. Great. I see everybody. If you can put in the chat that you're getting it. On the main menu, it will ask you, I need help now, or main menu. So let's go to the I need help now. And this brings you to a decision tree. And I want you to toggle through the decision tree. It's based on just you touching it, and then you'll see. And so really this app provides really good reinforcement of all of these best practice that we're talking about. So just take a minute and just kind of look through the app to see what you can find. I need help now. That decision tree is kind of our big. And this gives you the advice about what to do when you encounter a survivor or someone at risk. So you might, if you're feeling nervous about going into a new situation, this is a good reinforcement. And you can see it's just a tap. And if I choose the other side, it taps on the other side. I'm going to go back. Also, you're going to want to take time after this to go through everything. And then if you go to the main menu, this is where you have a lot of really great resources. If you can see all those icons about if you have specific things related to PSEA, you have the decision tree, you have advice about the survivor's perspective, you have reinforcement of good practice on the look, listen, and link stuff. Yeah. So everything that I have talked about and will talk about today is you can usually find in this app as a reinforcement. As I mentioned, you do not need to have Wi-Fi to use the app. Now that you've downloaded it, you're free to go. Okay, so this is a great reinforcement tool. Okay, let's do the next slide. I'm noticing that we are running on time. I want to talk a little bit about the PFA model, and I'm going to turn my video off since I know that some of you are in places where the Wi-Fi is not that strong. But I'll give you a thumbs up. Okay, so PFA as a model. We're also using PFA from a survivor-centered perspective. And that's why I'll briefly, for the next like 20 or so minutes, go over the PFA model from a GBV perspective. As we mentioned, prepare, look, listen, link. What do you think you need to do as a non-GBV specialist to prepare for going out into the field after listening to the video and then also our discussions? What do you think? What key actions are part of the preparation phase? Any ideas? You can either write in the chat or raise your hand. What do you think you would need to do as a non-GBV specialist to prepare? Aha! Milena, awesome. That's exactly the answer. Yeah. So your preparation phase should have the exact information. Oh, Hawida, excellent. Exact information about team orientation. Excellent. Yep. Exact information about GBV services in the area. Yeah, perfect. That's exactly the answer. To know the referral pathway. Yep. And you should orient your team Exactly. Good. Question. What if there are no GBV services? What do you do then? Because I still am anticipating or am telling you that you have a responsibility. What do you do when there are no GBV services available where you work? And you have a focal point, but that person is based 200, 300, 400 kilometers away, and you have a survivor standing right in front of you. What would you do as a non-GBV specialist in a community where there are no GBV service providers? Oh, not as easy. What do you think? Okay, Hawida, call the focal person. That focal person, though, is 500 kilometers away. Yep, I see what you're saying, but the reality is our coverage of services is quite low because we just don't have the funding to provide services or the access to provide services in all of these communities where you might find, say, a wash person or a food security person or a health worker. What do you think? Afaf, I like that. You're like, report it to the GBV specialist and get his or her advice. That's a good one. But you have someone standing in front of you. Okay. What you need to do during the preparation phase, what you need to do, yes, is definitely maintain confidentiality. But what you need to do is look at what we call informal helpers or services. So in areas that do not have other service providers, some people said, what about health? Certainly you could refer them to a health center. But what we do or recommend is to ask, is there someone in your life that you feel comfortable talking to or that you trust? And we call these informal networks. And in Sudan, they're strong. Is there a women's organization whom you trust that I can accompany you to? Is there a teacher in your school who you think is a good listener and can help you in this situation? Do you have someone in your family that you feel comfortable talking to? Does that make sense? So we often in our communities depend on these informal networks. And Akiko, I might put you on the spot right now to talk about the role of civil society organizations. So even in communities where you think there is nothing going on here, I guarantee you there's a women's network. Akiko, can you just give one or two sentences around, I think one of the strengths of the Sudan is the quality and also the dedication of women-led organizations, and even organizations is a strong term, right? But also just the networks that exist that you probably don't even know are there unless you ask. Akiko?
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for giving the floor. So yeah, just to highlight the good work that is led by women-led organization in Sudan. So maybe it's not that visible, and you may have not witnessed, their work. Some of you, but some of you may know that there are women organizations that are really strong and working for the community. So one of the example is that in Darfur states, we have a really limited presence of international actors, where, but, when we monitor, if any GBV intervention is done, including awareness raising and connecting survivors to the services, we see that a lot of intervention is done. This is actually done by local organization and namely by women-led organization. So we are really trying to work with them, to support, GBV survivors. the reason why it is important, to work with women-led organization, this is related to what you'll be, doing at your sector as well, is to, if you reflect women's organization or, women representatives, to plan, and design and implement your intervention to respective sectors, this will eventually lead to GBV risk mitigation, because there, the design itself is, of your intervention is reflecting, the women's view, women's, assessment of the safety risks, from their point of view. So, we, just to highlight, there are community-based, women-led organizations, many of them. Now, I'm sure you can find them, in the localities that you're working on, and I would strongly encourage to connect with them to, support, vulnerable women, girls, and the vulnerable population. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Akiko. Is that clear for everyone? So yes, you could report a trend to your focal point, who is based 400 kilometers away. And that might be a good way to kickstart more assessments in that village. If we're getting calls and understanding, our reality is GBV survivors are across Sudan, full stop. So this is, I'm just reading, Suzanne, your message, right? I mean, they exist. Whether there's a conflict or whether it's development, GBV survivors exist. And so there are many of these informal networks, but it is good to still maintaining confidentiality to report it to your focal person and say, I had this individual, especially if you're seeing it as a trend, because then it would initiate, ideally, an assessment process or a site visit to understand the dynamics better in that community. But as I mentioned, during the preparation phase, if you know that there are no services available, then you need to look at what we call, and I'm misrepresenting when I say informal. It's informal to us, but they're very formal networks in those communities. And so it would probably be good for you to understand what those are as well, particularly if they're helpful and maintain quality. But other ways you can do that, you can also ask if there's a trusted friend that they can talk to about these issues. Always know your limitations. You do not need to be that friend, because you're not. You're not going to be able to follow up with that person. You don't have the skill set to provide the psychosocial support needed for them to go into recovery or others, right? And there's no expectation. But you can jumpstart a conversation that says, do you have someone trusted in your life that you can talk to about these issues, who can help you through this process? And that's exactly what PFA is. That's the limitation. And if you're seeing and are worried about this and think it's a trend, you should very definitely call your focal point. There is one in every state. Even if they're not near you, they can start a process of understanding more what's needed in that village or in that area. And then potentially we could get funding to expand there. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, next slide. Please. Very quickly, the definition of PFA. Who can help me here? I'm going to go down my list here. Let me see. Who can help me? How about May Habib? May Habib, can you help me read this off? May Habib. Or Sahar Abubakar. Sahar, can you help us read this? This lets me know if everybody's fully invested in our training. Go ahead. Go ahead. If you're off mic, you can help. Makrim, go ahead. Or I see my, actually, Makrim, I see that we have my Minyet here as well. How about we get a new voice? Because you were really good about reading before. Go ahead. Win.
Definition of PFA is humane, supportive, and practical assistance to fellow human beings who recently suffered exposure to serious stresses and involves the bullet points are non-intrusive, practical care and support. It is assessing needs and concerns and helping people to address basic needs such as food, water, listening but not pressuring the people to talk, and comforting people and helping them to feel calm, helping people connect to information, services, and social supports, and protecting people from further harm.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
So
exactly.
a guide for the field workers. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So there we go. Humane, supportive, and practical assistance to fellow human beings who recently suffered exposures to serious stressors. It doesn't even mention GBV in here. This is how much we don't want you to be involved or engaged in specific cases. We want you to be good human beings. Full stop. That's it, right? This PFA model is used throughout. It's not just specific to GBV, right? We want you to treat someone in crisis in an empathetic, safe, ethical, and show kindness. There we go. Next slide, please. What PFA is not? It is not something only professionals can do. It is not professional counseling. We have very few even GBV specialists who have the education and the experience to provide counseling. That is another discipline, and it takes a lot of experience and education to be what we call a counselor, a professional counselor. It is not psychological debriefing. Therefore, we do not have any detailed discussion of the distressing event. Remember, it sounds like you're in a really tough position now. Is there someone whom you trust that I can help you link to? That's it. It is not asking people to analyze what happened or put time and events in order. If there's a GBV caseworker, that's their job. That's what we do during our intake, during GBV case management. That might be what a formal women's network might do when they're referring to different services. Although PFA involves being available to listen to people's stories, it is not pressuring people to tell you their feelings or reactions to an event. I'll just leave this here for a couple seconds so we can read through them. These are good reminders. Okay, next slide, please, Shiva. So as we mentioned, one of the biggest things we need to do in the preparation phase is make sure that we have an understanding of referral pathways. We need to be aware of available services. Howard, I'm going to come right back to you. And if we go to our app, let's everybody come back to the app. I'm going to put myself on. These videos are really not making people look. Hi. So I'm going to go back to my app. We've tried to make these as easy as possible. Okay. I'm going back to the app and I'm going to the main menu. So take me straight to the app. I'm going to the second one, which says main menu. I'm clicking that. And if we scroll down to the section that says My Tools, it says Information Sheet. And I want us to hit that button. So this is an area right on your phone that you can input contact details or notes about available services in the community in which you're working. So you can have it all right there on your phone. Okay, questions? And Akiko, I think you had a good reinforcement here. For linking the survivors to the community-based organizations or women-led organizations, please make sure that you have survivors' consent. For GBV, for every actions needs survivors' informed consent. And as we said, this is one of the options you can present, but a survivor might not choose to follow up on it, just like we saw in that video. You can present, but they might say, nope, I'm not ready. They could really just need their basic needs met. And it has nothing to do with a potential, right? They might be experiencing GBV, but maybe they need access to water and food. And then so it might be another connection. But Akiko, if you want to keep that always in the chat, consent. The survivor-centered approach means that we do not do anything without the survivor's consent. So they might choose not to do anything. And you can say, here, we saw in the video, they gave them the card and said, if you'd like to follow up at another time, here is the resource information. And we do recommend if you have contact details for services that exist, then you can put those in what we call this referral pathway. Good. Thanks, Akiko. I'm going to take my video off. Okay. So the question is, would you at this point, thinking where you're working, would you be able to fill in this information sheet? Just take a few seconds to reflect. Would you be able to fill in this information sheet? Hannah, good. So Hannah's saying yes. This is more of a self-reflection. Good. Hawita's like, yes, I can. And always a reminder that your referral or your trusted persons might be for a women's group, might be a teacher, might be a healthcare worker. Makaram's like, of course I could. Good. Good. That's great if you can. Okay. Next slide, please. Why are referrals needed? It's because survivors typically have multiple and complex needs that require a comprehensive set of services. Whether we're able to meet those needs is a different story. In a perfect response, the GBV subsector has unlimited funds to be able to do just that. But our reality in the Sudan particularly is what Akiko described. That we have very limited formal sort of professionalized services provided by agencies that do provide specialized services. We rely a lot on the work of women and local civil society organizations. And you can probably think about what some of the gaps are because of that in terms of technical capacity and other things. One single organization cannot effectively provide all of these services. And in times of peace and others in more developed countries than the government, in fact, provides a lot of these. But we know in times of crisis, often those systems are broken down. Next slide, please. So what are referrals? Anybody? This is kind of, I think we have this one. If you want to write in the chat. Actually, if you can hit the next one. It'll swing up. I think we already had the discussion. Yeah. The process by which a survivor gets in touch with the professionals and or institutions regarding her case. And then it's the process by which different professional sectors communicate and work together in a safe, ethical, and confidential manner to provide the survivor with comprehensive support. And I'm going to go one further. Based on a survivor's consent. Okay, next slide. And I think we covered this one too. So we'll go real quick, Shiva, on this one. We might get a little redundant. Yep, it's a flexible mechanism that safely links survivors to supportive and competent services. And I think this is the main point on this one, is for us in the GBV subsector, we look at the following sectors in which we engage most regularly. The health sector. In order for us to have clinical services for survivors, particularly of sexual assault, physical assault, clinical management of rape, for instance, our first point of referral is most often the health center in the formal referral pathway. In communities, it's often community leaders. Psychosocial support, and there's a broad range of services. We're on our intervention pyramid, for instance. So psychosocial support at the very bottom level of what we call a pyramid of services is basically the ability to meet a survivor or a person at risk's basic needs, which is shelter, food, water. And we saw from those first pictures in the beginning of this presentation that if we don't provide safe shelter, safe access to wash facilities, safe access to food, we could inadvertently cause more harm. And that's actually what we're seeing in Sudan. And we can mitigate those risks. And then we look at security and protection. So these services are things like safe houses, the police, community monitoring systems. It could also be women and girls safe spaces. Then we have legal and justice, and then economic and/or reintegration. And those usually come more closer into the recovery phase, in fact, especially if we're underfunded, we don't often get into the economic reintegration or livelihoods of it, which is unfortunate because many of our vulnerabilities are directly linked to food insecurity. Okay, next slide, please. I've got a couple more videos that'll help us kind of visualize this. Shiva, next. Yeah, thanks. Okay. I think we have to go.
Sorry, it was a bit delayed.
That's okay. Is there one more after that one, or is that the next one? Okay. Nope, you're right. We're back. Okay. So let's think about look and listen. So we already talked about the preparation phase. That's basically understanding the dynamics of the community and the service availability. But what about look and listen? When someone discloses their experience of GBV to you, basically, right? These are the bare minimums that we want you as a GBV specialist to think about. One, to introduce yourself. It's a sign of respect and courtesy, and it also identifies you as a helper. For example, when I worked in the Philippines after Haiyan, all of us, universally, it came out in our meetings that we had to wear clothing that identified which organization we worked for, and then also our ID badge. It assured community members that we were, in fact, helpers attached with organizations, and they were very visible about it. So introduce yourself. Address urgent basic needs. I think you saw in the video that they had provided water to someone. They had moved another person to a more safe space. It also says in this area, we need to think about, be aware of the different ways that people reach out for support. And this is directly linked to some of those cultural and social norms. And I'm rephrasing this again. Recognize what you can and cannot manage. Know your limitations. This is a major theme of this approach. Know your limitation. Let's watch a video that might explain more. Okay.
Je suis Salina Karama Pishufila and affare in tuteliava. Mi ha risorto che per ispe farifala, che non simile vai.
Hey!
Okay. What are some things we notice? The language is not important, right? This is kind of where a picture says 1,000 words. So what they're saying is not important necessarily. What did you take out from this video? I have the hiccups. This was PFA. What are some of the things you might have noticed? Hannah, go ahead.
Hi, Jessica. First of all, the way that the service provider talk to the children through the body language, she get down and talk to them like in a friendly way, and explain to them that maybe like that there is another person. If they know them, they can go to them, and the other person when like saying hi for them. And we notice that the children like feeling is not safe, like feeling good and willing to go. It's like about building relationship and the body language that we talk to them.
Yep, exactly. Yep. And Melina, you're right. Meeting the eye level of the child and the overall attitude of the field worker. You could tell just by watching the video, the worker showed empathy, wasn't over emotional, showed some empathy, but also very quickly referred. The only thing I would say, and this is particular to Save the Children, is she wrote something down in her notebook, but you would not need to do that. But I just wanted to illustrate how quickly that engagement was. She looked. What did she see during the look phase? What do you think? What did she see during the look phase? She probably saw that that was a very insecure environment. I'm guessing she looked around. She also saw that those children were unaccompanied. As a service provider, you would not leave two children in an insecure area, one who has clearly needs medical aid. And that's a difference of how you would engage with a child. But that doesn't mean that person then became a child protection caseworker. What they did was show empathy and kindness, exactly what you would want someone to show your children in such an event. Empathy and kindness, and very quickly just referred them over to a service that specializes in that. If Save the Children were not working in that community, there was no formal referral, what could you have done? You could think about a school. You could think about the health worker. You could think about the head of a women's organization, right? So that you don't just abandon potentially vulnerable survivors of GBV. And I'm seeing some of these comments. Followed the survivor-centered approach. Yep. Very much. Did you see the difference in the visibility? Clearly marked as a helper. And then Afaf, you're right, we saw a direct referral to the service. And one that we didn't see that you didn't write here, and I'll write it in, accompanied the small children to the service. Does that make sense to everybody? That entire engagement took literally 1 minute and 30 seconds. Mawada, you have your hand raised. Go ahead. I see you're off mic, Mawada. You can go ahead. Or write in the chat too, if you prefer. Okay, we're not hearing Mawada, but why don't you write your comment in the chat so we can make sure that it's captured. Okay, any other questions? Look, they listened in a respectful manner, right? They got down to the level so that they could have eye contact. Okay. Let us, next slide, please. So link, and this is really about linking to services, right? Can someone help me with the link? How about Azza? Azza, can you read the link slide? Azza Hassan. I'm going to call somebody else. I will find you. All right. How about, I'm going all the way to the bottom. Nafisa. Oh, actually, I see that you don't have a mic. How about Suzanne El Wakil? Suzanne El Wakil. Can you help us read this last slide? We don't have so much time left. We will get done within another 15 minutes. Suzanne El Wakil. Can you help us?
Hi everyone. Sorry, I just have some issues. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I have to read, right?
Yeah, please.
Okay. As you support the survivor to make the decision on their next step, ask the survivor if there is someone he or she trusts to go to the support. If any services do exist, provide information to the survivor on the available resources on the option for more comfort. Compositionally in the conversation, after the conversation, reflection, and self-care.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Suzanne. Yeah, pretty basic, right? As I mentioned, if there are no GBV personnel or other support services in the area, we ask the survivor if there is someone he or she trusts to go to for support. Yeah? And if services do exist, provide information to the survivor on the available resources or options for more comfort. And we say comfort because their needs might be met by just simply giving them water. Compassionately end the conversation. You are not a caseworker. You are not expected to document the case. You're expected to treat them with kindness and then move. And then after the conversation, hopefully you'll have some time to reflect on how that impacted you as an individual as well. Next slide. I think we have another video. Yeah, let's look at this video and see if this one actually makes me a little emotional as well for some reason. Okay, let's listen to this one.
Cesarina, camina. ¿Esto qué pasa? Ale, gotea. Hey!
Okay, we only have one more slide after this, but I think this is a really good way to end our time together. And it just reinforces how simple acts of kindness can have such an impact on the coping strategy of a woman or an adolescent who's in crisis. And what we saw there isn't as if, and you can go back one slide, Shiva. What we saw there wasn't as if they were doing anything that was so extreme. What that Save the Children worker did was show kindness to a woman who was clearly in crisis. And I want to remind all of us that sometimes when basic needs are met, then women can then, right? Once those needs are met, they can think and they can make informed decisions about what to do next. Anybody who's ever had a crying baby who's hungry knows the stress that that causes. And for this individual, who might be someone at risk, who might be a survivor of violence, the main priority was for her to find a safe space to feed her baby. And all of you can do that. All of you can show the kindness, the empathy that that worker did. And this is what we also know many times. These at-risk individuals or survivors then have the strength or the wherewithal to actually make informed decisions. How about others? Did we see anything else from this video that resonates with you or that you can take away from that video? Anybody? You can even write in the chat. And I want to reinforce that they didn't do any casework. That's the job of a GBV specialist. What they did was basically be a good person, right? Which all of us should be through our work, but sometimes we need to be reminded of that. And when it's a GBV survivor, we make sure that not only are you showing empathy and that you're a good person, but you do that through a survivor-centered lens. And that means that you are doing it confidentially, with respect, with the lens of non-discrimination, and most importantly, consent. We only have 5 minutes left, so we're not going to do that case study, but I want to leave these 5 minutes for questions. And actually, you make a really good point, Suleiman, that these limitations are also put in place for your safety. The more engaged that you become with a GBV survivor and their case, the more risk that you are taking on. Risk of retaliation, risk of stigma, risk of inadvertently causing more harm to the survivor. Yep. Abuela Gassim, that's exactly right. It shows the kindness and safety of survivors. Yeah. And it also shows the resilience of women and girls. That often, if their most basic needs can be met, then they can make decisions that affect their families, right? With consent. Okay. Any questions? Because I know we only have a few minutes left. How about questions? Hawida, yeah, small actions matter. Ah, you captured that really well. I'm going to remember that. Small actions matter and can have ultimately the biggest impact. Go ahead. Suzanne, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yes, hi everyone. I have just, I mean, in such cases, we have many questions related to our interventions. According to the observation, there are many GBV cases happening within the gathering sites, or we can name them as the government want to be named gathering sites. So saying how to support when they are actually living in the gathering sites where they've been harassed or face any kind of problem within the camp where they're living. We already receiving some cases like where to put them, where to go, because we are lacking shelters and we don't have a proper people who can manage the shelters or where to be referred. Saying that we don't want to put them in a high risk by taking them from the camp or from the gathering site to another place where they can be more recognized after such cases. This is definitely with the stigma that they may be facing. I mean, it's a bit mess here, especially the area where we don't have NGOs, CSOs, because many of the areas in Sudan, we don't have many NGOs before because according to the government, there were no need for support in such areas as like northern state, for example. So I hope it's clear. I mean,
yeah,
there are many issues.
It is. Yeah, and I think what we need is, Suzanne, I don't know what sector you're working in, but one, if you're a non-GBV specialist, keep to what the guidance, the step-by-step guidance in this training about where your intervention or engagement starts and where it ends. That's in the short term. But in the longer term, you should be advocating with protection, with shelter, you're saying that you're experiencing in the collection centers, people who are at risk of gender-based violence or survivors, whether they have done it outside or inside or exposed inside. That's all of us. We have a collective responsibility to mitigate risks. GBV subsector is there to provide services. Everybody else is there to mitigate GBV risks. And so once we do with your sector specific, we can talk about ways that we can identify those risks and then very practical measures in which we can mitigate or get rid of those risks to hopefully reduce the number of women who you are encountering. But we also need to make sure that the services are available. And if I mean, the GBV subsector, Akiko is always asking. She's always pushing and advocating for more money and for more availability of services. But I can be honest, when we have other sectors who are also recognizing the insecurity of women and girls, it's so powerful for us. So I don't know all of the sectors represented here today, but if we collectively, with one voice, show that women and girls aren't able to access WASH facilities for this reason, food insecurity linked to GBV, we have a much stronger case of increasing our funding to get those life-saving services for survivors in the collection centers. Okay, I think we're just on time. I want to make sure that we do. If you have any other questions, please do reach out to Akiko and her team. They are here to support you as well. As mentioned, we will be following up these more broader PFA sort of pocket guide trainings with specific trainings about how we're going to mitigate risks. So Suzanne, ideally, one of the exercises we will do is identifying risks in collection centers. And then we're going to go through that guidance and say, how do we mitigate those practically? And so I hope you will join us for those. I want to thank you again for joining me today. I hope this was useful. Please do reach out to Akiko. She has just put the subsector email address in the chat. If you have any questions about whom you should be connecting or linking people to, you can either reach out to Akiko and Noha, or you can also reach out to your focal points at state level. So thank you very much. And I hope to see you in the future when we talk about your sector specific risk mitigation. So that very first bullet point that we talked about in the beginning. So thanks everybody for joining us, and I hope you have a great afternoon, and I hope that you stay safe. And thanks to Shiva, always appreciated.
Thank you, Jessica.